All right. Well, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, John Hartig. He is visiting scholar at the University of Windsor Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research, as well as a member of the board of directors of the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy. During 2017-2018, Dr. Hartig was a Fulbright scholar at the Balsillie School of International Affairs in Waterloo, Ontario. For 14 years, he served as refuge manager for the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge. John is also an award-winning nonfiction writer, focusing on accelerating the sustainability transition and inspiring the next generation of environmentalists, conservationists, and sustainability entrepreneurs in urban areas. His literary awards include the 2020 Next Generation Indie Award for Waterfront Porch, the 2015 Gold and Bronze Medals from the Nonfiction Authors Association, and his book, Burning Rivers, won the Green Book Festival Award in the scientific category and was a finalist for a Next Generation Indie Award, among several other national and international awards. His current project is called Ecosystem-Based Management of the Laurentian Great Lakes Areas of Concern. I'm not sure I totally understand that. Hopefully he'll get into that in this presentation. So speaking of waterfront porch, John is likely to speak to us this morning from his waterfront porch on Hickory Island at the convergence of the Detroit River and Lake Erie. So, John, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. And your what you recited at the beginning was like a perfect segue into what I want to talk about. Can you enable my screen share, who's ever the host of the meeting, please?
That is me, and yes, I can. I'm gonna make you a host here. Once I figure it out. You should now be able to share.
All righty. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Can everyone see that?
Now we can, yes.
Now you can, great. So, you know, the Western Lake Erie are, you know, shared resources, and we've been working for, you know, over 2 decades on something called the state of the strait. Trois being the strait, so the state of the strait. What's the state of it? What's the status? And we've looked at a lot of different elements, and our most recent one here is called checkup. Think of going to your doctor for a checkup, and we want to assess the ecosystem health of the Detroit River and Western Lake Erie. So we hold this binational forum. 1 year it's in the United States. It could be at Wayne State. It could be at U of M or Eastern. Then 2 years later, it alternates over primarily at University of Windsor. And we choose a topic together in common, and we, you know, do a deep dive on it. And so our last one was in 2019 at the University of Windsor, and we tackled this indicator project. You know, we would compile available data, long-term data, 30 or 40 years of data on an indicator, interpret them, bring them together, and assess health together. You know, over 50 organizations from both sides of the border were involved. Pretty neat. This is always a neat photo to show just how we share the Detroit River, how we share Western Lake Erie. I'll point out to you that this is a photo, a NASA photo before algal blooms in Western Lake Erie. But think of back in the 1960s, just how bad it was. Yeah, the Federal Water Pollution Control Administration identified the Detroit River as one of the most polluted rivers in the United States. we had back then massive algal blooms in western Lake Erie, and media were reporting that Lake Erie is dead. The bathing beaches at Sterling State Park were posted with signs, "Do not swim. It is unsafe for swimming." And the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare reported that the Ford Rouge plant was discharging 3,400 liters of oil per day. That's a lot of oil. And then both in 1960 and 1967, oil pollution caused 12,000 ducks and 5,400 ducks respectively to die because of oil pollution. Later in that day, 1969, we all know that the Rouge River caught on fire. And in 1970, a graduate student from the University of Western Ontario was analyzing fish from Lake St. Clair and came up with mercury 6 times the public health standard. And he had to go out and redo sampling of fish. Came back the same level, 6 times the safe standard for safe human consumption, and they had to shut down the fishery. This news went right across the world. It was called the Mercury Crisis of 1970. They banned the human consumption of fish for the St. Clair River, Lake St. Clair, Detroit River, and Western Lake Erie. That same year was the first year of Earth Day, the very first Earth Day. And most people think of Madison, Wisconsin or UC Berkeley as places where Earth Day started. But here, auto workers from the UAW and the CAW held a wake on the Detroit River. They had boats from both sides of the river come together, a Canadian flag, a US flag, put a wreath in the river, and that got national news. And again, unions were ahead on this, lobbying for safe working conditions, but a clean environment for the places where all their employees lived. In 1985, the International Joint Commission between Canada and the United States identified the Detroit, Rouge, Clinton, and Maumee rivers as pollution hotspots. Areas of concern, Dennis, that's a sort of a binational term, an area of concern. I guess it's a little easier on them, but those are pollution hotspots. And in 1985, we had some of you may have remembered, a dry cleaning solvent spill called the Blob that occurred up in Petrochemical Valley in Sarnia, Ontario. And that blob moved its way down through the lower St. Clair River, Lake St. Clair. He shut all municipal water intakes because of this water pollution. Zebra mussels came in through vessels traveling through the strait here. In 1988, the next year, quagga mussels were discovered. These are invasive species that dramatically change the food web of the Great Lakes. And then 1 year later, round gobies, a small little fish, is found in the ballast water of ships and got into the Great Lakes. And in 2008, harmful algal blooms came back in a big way. And since then, 9 of the last 11 years, we've had harmful algal blooms. And then 2017, recently, what they call PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. We found PFAS contamination in the Huron River, and they had to ban the human consumption of fish from the Huron River because it was so bad. And currently, the Detroit River, Maumee River, and Western Lake Erie are designated as impaired waters under the U.S. Clean Water Act. That means they get special attention from a regulatory approach. So what has happened since those worst of days of pollution? You know, we've seen a 97% reduction in oil releases, and those winter duck kills due to oil pollution have been eliminated. We've seen substantial improvement in municipal wastewater treatment upgrading all plants from primary treatment, which is just settling and disinfection, to secondary treatment with phosphorus removal. On the right, you see there a picture of the Detroit wastewater treatment plant, the largest single site wastewater treatment plant in the United States on the banks of the Detroit River and Rouge River. We've seen over a 90% decrease in phosphorus discharges to Detroit River, and a 90% reduction in untreated waste from combined sewer overflows. So old cities like Detroit and Toronto and Milwaukee, and they're all over the place. Old cities had combined storm and sanitary sewer. When it rained, when there was lots of precipitation, the carrying capacity of that combined storm and sanitary sewer system was exceeded, and raw sewage would be discharged at different points. That's a combined sewer overflow point into our water bodies. So good news is we've seen a 90% reduction in the untreated portion of that waste. We've seen a 4,600 metric ton per day decrease in chloride discharges. That's primarily due to changes in the treatment processes of the chemical industries. We've seen an 80% decline in mercury and walleye since the mercury crisis of 1970. No one thought that was going to be possible back 50 years ago. They thought it would at least take a century or more to do that. We've seen a 91% decline in PCBs, a 92% decline in DDE, the breakdown product of DDT, that pesticide, and a 94% decline in dioxin, the worst of the dioxins. It's called 2,3,7,8 tetrachlorodibenzodioxin. In herring gull eggs from Fighting Island that have been systematically monitored for the last nearly 50 years. We've remediated about 290,000 cubic meters of contaminated sediment on the U.S. shoreline of the Detroit River between 1993 and most recently 2020 at the Uniroyal site. We've remediated about 400,000 cubic meters of contaminated sediment in the lower Rouge River between 1986 and 2020. The most in the old channel of the Rouge River that goes around Zug Island. And we've completed 53 soft shoreline projects, making the shoreline suitable for habitat, 9 sturgeon spawning reefs, and numerous other island and riparian habitat projects in the last 20 years. Back in the 60s, no bald eagles, no peregrine falcons, no osprey were reproducing in the watershed. No lake sturgeon, no lake whitefish were reproducing. Beaver were long gone for a century because of the fade. And today we can say that we have the return of bald eagles, peregrine falcons, osprey, lake sturgeon, lake whitefish, walleye, mayflies, and even beaver. If you add that up, it's one of the single most remarkable ecological recovery stories in North America. And who would have thought that was even possible 50 years ago? In contrast to the I showed you, here's what algal blooms look like today. It's not municipal wastewater treatment plants or industries causing this. This is caused by agricultural runoff, primarily from the Maumee River. So accelerated nutrient enrichment, the big term is eutrophication, but accelerated nutrient enrichment in the 50s led algal blooms in the 60s that were a catalyst for all kinds of phosphorus control programs. They were implemented in the 70s and led to improvements in algal blooms by the and early 90s. These improvements, however, were short-lived. They were ephemeral, with the return of harmful algal blooms in the 90s and the 2000s. And we've had, again, in the last 10 years, 7 of the last 10 years, we've had harmful algal blooms. You're there on the right. In the 1940s and 50s, mayflies were extirpated. They were sort of they were not found locally for Western Lake Erie because of the water pollution, and now they've returned after a 40-year absence. In the 1970s, the Lake Erie Committee of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission said the Lake Erie walleye population was in a crisis state. Today, it's 4 times that level, and of course, we're part of the walleye capital of the world. Concentrations of legacy contaminants in fish have generally declined, but health advisories still remain in effect on certain species and certain size classes. Generally, the larger, the fattier, with the fish with more fat, the higher the concentrations of contaminants. Concentrations of polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, DDE, polychlorinated naphthalines, and other organic contaminant have declined in herring gull eggs from Middle Island, which is in the middle of Western Lake Erie, in response to banning certain pesticides and more strict regulation of these toxic substances. In general, contaminants and sediments have exhibited a decreasing trend, but are still present at levels of concern to wildlife and human health. Contributing to these problems are in Western Lake Erie have been the introduction of zebra mussels and quagga mussels. Here you see them up on the upper right-hand photo. And these can dramatically alter the food webs of our ecosystems and make it much more difficult to manage these systems. General reductions in contaminants led to return of nesting bald eagles, peregrine falcons, and osprey, and even beaver are back in both Western Lake Erie and Detroit River, and now river otter are back for the first time in a century to Western Lake Erie. And I'll just say, keep an eye out on the Detroit River, because we may see these amazing animals return to the Detroit River in the next few years as well. So this ecological recovery story is remarkable, but much remains to be done to meet the long-term goal of this Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement that says we will restore the physical, chemical, and biological integrity of these ecosystems. Western Lake Erie is now at risk of crossing several potential tipping points caused by the interactions of a number of drivers and stresses. And this Stay of the Strait report identified 8 challenges, 8 environmental and natural resources challenges. And I'm going to give you some highlights from each of those. Here's a picture of the Jefferson-Chalmers area of Detroit. The Greyhaven, the canals of Greyhaven Island, and you see tiger dams there put all along the shoreline to keep water out of people's houses. Can you imagine that? That's pretty amazing. Whoops, I want to go back one. The Earth's average surface temperature has risen 0.9 degrees centigrade since the 19th century, and a change driven largely by carbon dioxide and other human-made emissions to the atmosphere. Most of the warming has occurred in the last 35 years, with 5 of the warmest years taking place since 2015. High water levels are putting a face on climate change in our region. Think of Greyhaven. Think of Belle Isle and the flooding on Belle Isle right now. This high water levels has caused property damage, increased shoreline erosion and flooding, and scientists worry that climate change is increasingly turning the extraordinary into the ordinary, and predict that warmer, wetter, and wilder weather is coming, and this will be one of the greatest challenges of the 21st century. As a high priority, we need to implement the City of Windsor's Climate Change Action Plan and Community Energy Plan, and Detroit's Sustainability Action Agenda and Change Action Plan. A multinational climate change plan should be developed for the Great Lakes Basin, consistent what is called for by the International Joint Commission's Great Lakes Water Quality Board. And we need to continue monitoring of this. Researchers, decision makers, climate change experts, land managers, and other stakeholders should be regularly report, understand, and inform climate change adaptation and mitigation. So mitigation is how do we reduce sort of carbon emissions? How do we get at the root cause? Adaptation means how do we adapt? How do we build more green infrastructure? How do we plant more trees like Rotary has done? How do we soften the shoreline and build in more wetlands, which are like big sponges that can soak up water? These algal blooms, or the big word eutrophication, which is the accelerated aging of lakes. On the right here, you see a picture from downtown Toledo and the Maumee River, and rowers rowing right through the middle of an algal bloom starting in the Maumee River that will push out into Lake Erie and cover most of western Lake Erie. So the frequency of what they call HABs is increasing largely because of increased bioavailable phosphorus. So bioavailable is the amount or the proportion of phosphorus that is directly available for plant growth, whether it's algae, like you see in that picture, or aquatic plants growing along the shoreline. And these cause tangible economic environmental harm. Maumee is the single largest source of this, the biggest proportion coming from agriculture. In 2018, following several years of large algal blooms, the state of Ohio declared the open Lake Erie as officially impaired for recreational use. That has a big meaning for regulation. In response to public concern for algal blooms and the designation of these waters as impaired, Ohio EPA is developing a total maximum daily load, which is like a regulatory tool, a regulatory approach to restore impaired waters that identifies the maximum amount of a pollutant, in this case phosphorus, that a body of water can receive while still meeting water quality standards. And then through that, they can actually regulate the contributions of the phosphorus to the lake, causing those problems. Recommendations: high priority placed on implementing, completing this TMDL, total maximum daily load approach, in a timely fashion, ensuring sound and actionable science that is designed with stakeholders and decision makers to better inform management programs. We need adequate funding for necessary binational cooperative monitoring, research, modeling with a priority on actionable science, and that this science be closely coupled with management to achieve long-term goals for the Maumee River and Western Lake Erie. Another challenge is toxic substances contamination. Contaminated sediment remediation has been completed on the River Raisin and the Canadian portion of the Detroit River areas of concern. That is good news. All of it is completed. Between 1993 and 2020, 290,000 cubic meters of contaminated sediment was remediated on the U.S. side of the Detroit River. U.S. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and Michigan Eagle, that's Michigan Department of Energy, Great Lakes Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, have identified an additional 5.1 million cubic meters of contaminated sediment on the U.S. side of the Detroit River that require remediation. That is a big number. That's going to require a lot of money to fix. Additional contaminated sediment remediation is needed also on the lower end of the Rouge River in the shipping channel. The recommendations: a high priority should be placed on preventing toxic substances problems. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It sure makes sense to control these contaminants at their source and prevent the input in the first place, so we don't have to go through these major cleanup programs in future years. And again, a high priority placed on remediating these 5.1 million cubic meters on the US side of the Detroit River and the shipping channel of the Rouge River. And to do that, we have a great tool in the toolbox called the Great Lakes Legacy Act and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative that was just renewed on the US side. And with that, 65% of the cost of that cleanup, that remediation of contaminated sediments, can come from the federal government, and then 35% can come from non-federal partners. That could be the state, that could be industries, that could be the county or other things. Invasive species, we've had over 180 non-native species introduced in the last 2 centuries. 11 species have been introduced to this from Lake Huron to Lake Erie since 1988. And of course, zebra mussel came in Lake St. Clair in 88, quagga mussel in Lake Erie in 89, and the spiny water flea, which is in the lower right-hand corner here, in 1994 in the Detroit River. So we need to prevent the introduction of exotic species, just like contaminants. Every year of delay can result in more ecological harm and economic impacts. Government should ensure current regulations also apply to the domestic fleet, the Laker fleet, as well as the ones that come across from Europe and Russia and Asia, to reduce interlake dispersal of these invasive species. The effectiveness of ballast water treatment should be verified through a comprehensive sampling program, and region-wide regulations should be enacted to get at other pathways of introducing exotic species, like the aquarium trade, where people take exotic species from their aquaria and put them into the waters that enter the Great Lakes. And then, of course, species-specific methods of control and impact mitigation be developed. Another issue is the loss of and degradation of habitat. Here on the right-hand side of your screen, you see the Detroit River in 1815, and you have coastal wetlands in green that just fringed the shoreline on both sides of the river. And then to the right of that is a 1982 map showing the black portions is what remains from 1815. So in total, that represents a 97% loss in coastal wetlands on the Detroit River. We've had a 23% of the Rouge River watershed is impervious. The target is 10. So impervious surface is rooftops, roads, parking lots, and water runs off. If you have green infrastructure, that stormwater can be absorbed by the green infrastructure. The tree canopy of Southeast Michigan is 33%. The target is 40%. 44% of the US side of the Detroit River is considered soft. 61% of the Canadian side of the river is considered soft with habitat, and the target is 70. So we want to increase that. And 32 habitat rehabilitations under the Detroit River Remedial Action Plan have been implemented, and 53 soft shoreline engineering projects. Recommendations: establishing quantitative targets for habitat creation, protection, and rehabilitation programs, ensuring long-term monitoring. Some of these projects get implemented, but they don't know how truly effective they are. We need to strengthen transboundary cooperative conservation efforts because we share this ecosystem together. And we need to expand citizen science to help evaluate the effectiveness of habitat restoration projects. I know you have a particular interest in citizen science and water right now. And I'm just going to point your attention to one thing. The Cleveland Water Alliance got funding from, the Gooden Foundation in Cleveland, the Community Foundation for South Michigan here, and a number of other foundations. Their goal is to have a smart citizen science initiative to build a regional movement that increases the quality of community water this to action. Okay, so they are coming up with a new technology, a very more simplified spectrometer that can measure water quality by anyone from school-aged children to adults, hook that to smartphones and tablets, and help governments make decisions. So this is a terrific opportunity to get wider involved in what the Cleveland Water Alliance focuses on every day, applying technology to water to drive economic development and spark innovation. So that's going to be available in the next couple of years, and think about putting that in the hands of school children and universities in the watersheds of the Detroit River and Western Lake Erie in both Canada and the United States. Our next challenge, so to speak, is non-point source pollution, the pollution that comes in not from a pipe like an industry or a municipality, but is the runoff off the land. So as regulatory programs came online and achieved greater control of pollutants starting in the early 70s, the proportion from non-point source, the runoff off the land, increased. Nowhere in the Great Lakes is this more evident than Lake Erie, and Maumee is the single largest source, and most of that coming from agriculture. Urban non-point source pollution continued to plague the Detroit River. Recommendations for that: more effective control of agricultural non-point source phosphorus loadings through applying combinations of practices like cover crops, buffer strips, applying fertilizer below the soil surface of the land, and regenerative agriculture. That includes actually building also and rehabilitating wetlands, which can soak up this phosphorus. More opportunities be provided for among the many watersheds of Southeast Michigan and Southwest Ontario, and an effective educational campaign be developed and implemented to build public awareness and understanding. That'll be essential to address this. Most people still don't recognize that they're part of an ecosystem, and what they do to the ecosystem, they do to themselves. Human health and environmental justice. Here's a picture of Zug Island, and exposure to contaminants and pathogens continues to affect human health, and communities of color are clearly disproportionately exposed. Although the percentage of Detroit children with elevated blood levels has declined substantially, lead hazards still pose a significant danger and threat to Detroit children. Air pollution respects no boundaries and impacts those who live adjacent to or downwind of emitting sources, and Southwest Detroit remains one of the most polluted areas in Michigan. Recommendations for this: considered efforts be made by health, government, nonprofit, and community development organizations to prevent and respond to lead poisoning in this city, Detroit, and that continued research and monitoring be performed on lead effects on children's health. Environmental justice must become a priority, demonstrated through developing an environmental justice screening tool, assessing cumulative exposure to pollutants, committing resources to a long-term community air monitoring program, particularly Southwest Detroit, and virtual elimination of persistent toxic substances, implementing the Detroit Climate Action Plan, the Detroit Sustainability Action Agenda, and fully recognizing the principles of environmental justice as defined in the first National People of Color Leadership Summit. Our last one, population expansion and land use changes. there are no simple solutions to the problem of urban sprawl and its impacts on the environment. Southeast Michigan and Southwest Ontario need to better utilize growth management techniques. A high priority must be developing and implementing model ordinances for sustainable land use practices. And again, we need to place a priority on implementing Windsor and Essex counties' official plans, the environmental master plan for Windsor, the climate change adaptation plan, the community energy plan, and all the similar ones in Detroit, like its master plan, the Detroit Future City Strategic Framework, the Sustainability Action Plan, SEMCOG's Green Infrastructure Vision, and a host of others. Also, we need a major educational camp around population growth management and sustainable land use and transportation planning. If you were to look back over the last 50 years, the major accomplishment over the public outcry over water pollution in the Detroit River and Lake Erie and other degraded ecosystems was clearly the enactment of laws like NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act of 1970 in the United States. It's the Magna Carta of environmental laws. More environmental laws are modeled after NEPA than any other law in the world. The Canadian Water Act of 1970, the Clean Water Act of 1972, the Canada-US Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement of 72, the Endangered Species Act of 1973. That is an amazing set of accomplishments. People spoke out and cared about the quality of the environment and the place they called home. I would argue that the major accomplishment of more recent decades has been the establishment of these non-organizations like Citizen Environment Alliance in Windsor, Friends of the Rouge, Friends of the Detroit River Canadian Cleanup, Detroiters Working for Environmental Justice, and more. Continued investment in capacity building for these NGOs is warranted. We stand at a defining moment in history. One choice that we all have in life is to follow a path towards stewardship of our natural resources and sustainable development. Another choice is to continue to deplete our natural capital, degrade our environments, and impose limitations on the choices available to our children and grandchildren. The legacy to shape. This report that I've just talked about, these were sort of the highlights, is available for you at stateofthestraight.org. And we try to do a lot of outreach on this to get this information of all. So thank you very much. And I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I know Mike posted a question on in the chat.
I can read it. I have it up. Is the overall problem contamination in the Detroit River and Western Lake Erie unique, or is it consistent with other urban areas across the globe that are located on waterways? Is this something?
Yes, there are many.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. There are many of these at the Great Lakes. You know, maybe we have a few more issues because we are the heart of the Industrial Revolution. We are the home of the arsenal of democracy. And I think some of our legacy pollutants, the magnitude of that problem is a little bigger here, like 5.1 cubic meters of contaminated sediment that yet have to be remediated. The number of brownfields are a little greater, but wherever you go, they're facing the challenges of climate change. So learning from others is really important as well. And then really the Great Lakes are ahead of some other places in the world. Like, you know, we cut our teeth on contaminated sediment remediation. Places all over the world are learning from us. So that we need to exchange ideas. We need to exchange thinking as well. We can learn from everyone on climate change. We can learn on everyone on restoring coastal wetlands and soft shoreline and everything else. So yeah, I think we are similar in many respects, but we're also unique because of the magnitude of the problem. And it is my opinion that we don't do enough on cooperative learning.
Oh, boy. Fascinating stuff. Go ahead. Dennis, you were first.
Question for John and John. That is John Chambers, our past district governor. John Hartig brought up an interesting connection between the Rotary commitment to clean water and the work that's being done in the region. And John, I think at our last meeting, John Chambers, I think I asked whether you knew of anything that the district is doing or Rotary International is doing in the Great Lakes. And so I want to put that out there again, because I think in that one slide, John Hartig offered us an opportunity to become engaged, whether it be through that citizen science student initiative or in other ways. So I guess my question is, number one, to John Hartig, any ideas he might have of how Rotary clubs locally or Rotary International might support this effort, and then John Chambers, whether he has any ideas of the same.
Yeah, well, I think there are lots, excuse me, there are lots of opportunities to get involved in citizen science. On the Canadian side, we have Holiday Beach, and one of the 3 best places to watch migrations in North America. And it's been going on for 40 years. What a great opportunity for children, families, and just people to get involved in making a difference, learning something about science and monitoring the migrations of 23 species of raptors. The sister site of that is at Metro Park called Detroit River Hawk Watch, and they're always looking for volunteers. But what a great thing, and what a you have an opportunity to form some partnerships between schools and them in doing that. Detroit Audubon has, Christmas bird counts, and they do marsh bird monitoring, and there's opportunities to be involved in Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge and Belle Isle State Park in stewardship and monitoring. I just wanted to throw that teaser out there, is that a new technology, people thinking about simplifying things, putting technology in the hands of young people to monitor the quality of their waters, and then seeing how those data get used to make decisions. So what a unique opportunity. And I put that intentionally in there because if I would like to help open the door, if there is some interest, to maybe bringing that technology to Southeast Michigan, to Detroit, and Windsor and Essex County. Like think of if you took a school, university prep science and math that sits virtually on the banks of the Detroit River, and you got them to monitor the quality of the Detroit River or Quanter Creek or something like that. I mean, it would be really fun to do that. So that's my answer, and I'll turn it over to the other John.
Thank you.
John, you're muted. You done mute?
Thank you.
Okay.
I think there's been some, and excuse me, I think John talked a little bit about it, especially in the Windsor area, planting of trees, looking at that stream, so forth. And with all the activities that we have, to me, it seems like it's more of a club or a group of clubs working together on it. And it's not something that comes up a lot. And I think that's part of the issue, Carol Ann, that when you said, let's get this out to everybody,
yeah,
I think people realize the importance of it throughout. and to spark something.
Maybe we
Yeah.
could solicit for some club partners, other
Yeah.
clubs, to,
Because I think,
work with us on a project or something.
Yeah, Windsor 19, 18 does some work. Carlo, and I guess I'll ask you, you got anything that's cropping up in your mind? Because I've been to some presentations in Canada, in the Canadian clubs where they talk about it, but I don't see the feet on the ground type.
Well, there's been some things that in past District Governor Rick Karen, colleague of John, I assume, because John, you are at the University of Windsor, right? Yeah.
Yes, I am.
Karen has put together during his years with relationships, and that's probably why you know about the trees being planted through Rotary and things like that. That's where you probably seen and learned that. We in our club had a member, but now with her family changes and stuff and things like that, is not a member of our club, but she's the communications director for IRCA. Danielle Bro, yes, Bro, and then her husband's name there, it just eludes me. But anyways, yeah, so she, there has been some things going on with IRCA. We've supported IRCA and their children's festivals, monetary help. So there's that, I guess. I mean, we could try to continue and form more relationships and partnerships and things like that. But it's interesting. That's why I chimed in here, not to make a change necessarily, but to learn more and see what are we doing, and is there more that we can do, and is there, are there windows that can be open, or doors, I should say, that could be open to possibly create more partnerships. So I think you led into something very good, Dennis. I mean, there should be more that we could do, and how can it be done, right?
Yeah.
Could I just add to that for a second, Carlo?
Please.
The work you did on planting trees with IRCA, Essex Region Conservation Authority, for the other ones was terrific, and Rotary was really helpful. The Trenton Rotary did a sort of a sister project in Southwest Detroit and planted a few trees a couple of years back. But the need, because of climate change, we're trying to adapt, and we need to have this green infrastructure. Trees are part of that. We need to have not water going in the basements. There's so many reasons to do this. But if we could get together and plant some trees in strategic locations, and Dennis, I'm thinking here of the Joe Louis Greenway. This is going to be a greenway that sort of circumnavigates the city and connects different nodes and communities. It connects all the way down to the Detroit Riverwalk. But think of the opportunities here along the Greenway to create little patches of habitat, trees and shrubs, to create a pollinator garden. But trees are such a good thing to do for climate change. So I think a partnership between Rotaries and to do more in Essex County, Windsor, Essex County, Carlo, to partner in Detroit and do some more, and it would be highly visible. It would get a lot of attention because of this interest in the Joe Louis Greenway.
Yeah, public image.
Yes. And there's also, we have this nonprofit organization called the Greening of Detroit. They've planted over 1 million trees, but they have a certificate program. They have a certificate program that they train young people to become, horticulturalists, arborists, and master gardeners and everything else. And then they help them get their first job in the field. So they have a constant cohort. So we could form a partnership with Greening of Detroit to plant some of these trees. It would be a unique partnership to do that. And so I think if we could think about Rotaries, plural, and some of these NGOs and do something that's high profile on both sides of the border, Carlo, to raise awareness of this issue, but then promote what Rotaries do and the impact they're having.
Ray, I don't know if you had a question still. You're on mute right now.
Who, me? I have a question.
Okay.
John, on so on a policy level, on the federal government level, is there something out there now, like policy, that you think is super important, something that's pending or something that needs to be reversed? Is there anything out there like tangible, kind of that you think is important?
Yeah. Well, I'll have to touch on politics here, right? I mean,
well, I understand. There's something.
It is, the new administration just signed back into the Paris Accord. You know what I mean? We've had some weakening of laws. I tried to intentionally, Bradley, talk about what was the of the 1960s and people speaking out. It was all those laws. Amazing set of accomplishments directly related to people speaking out. Well, we've had one of those laws, like the Clean Water Act and like the Air Act and other things. And so we need to make sure those regulatory laws are in place. That's the foundation of our efforts. And then on top of that, non-regulatory things, these cooperative things. So I think that also in the future, this Great Lakes Restoration Initiative that was just funded, re-upped, I could keep Dennis informed about that. And the next time we need a whole bunch of voices to speak out the importance of that, if you could send a letter from both sides of the border, even Carlo, to support that, that would be very helpful. And talking about cleaning up the environment. But there's no better example than Detroit. If you clean up the Detroit River, that leads to people asking, well, why can't we be connected to the Detroit River? Hence the Detroit River Walk. Hence, Joe Louis Greenway and Community Fund Southeast Michigan and Downriver Linked Greenways, reconnecting people to water. And then that leads to economic revitalization. So those are like three dominoes that begin to fall. So if I could keep in touch with Dennis, I could, there's a time to speak out. And if you would be willing to write a letter from the Rotary in support of sustained funding to not only clean up the Great Lakes, but to reconnect people to it and get all these amazing benefits and then help with revitalization.
You get the word
Does that
out
answer your
to
question?
individual Rotarians to also write too, not just the club, but
we got all kinds of people willing to speak out.
yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, John,
this is Patrick. I have a quick question. You mentioned the Detroit River Walk, and the conversation earlier about the hard shore versus the soft shore just makes me wonder, now granted it's wonderful development on both sides of the river, and it brings people down and they can enjoy the waterfront, but is it at odds with the goal of 70% soft shoreline? Is it hard development?
No, there have been 5 places on the Detroit Riverwalk where, in lieu of concrete breakwater, think of just a bunch of formed concrete on the shoreline or steel sheet piling that has no habitat whatsoever, they have softened the shoreline with big limestone, medium limestone, small limestone, and then there's been some plants that have been planted. So it's a combination of techniques called soft shoreline engineering that have been used. If you look at the Stroh River Place, anyone who walks along there, there's a cantilever over the river. The river walk actually goes out over the river. Underneath that is a whole bunch of fish habitat. When they built the wharf of the Detroit-Windsor Port Authority, for the cruise ships, in and around there is a whole bunch of habitat. So the key lesson from that is you have to be at the table where the decisions are made. You have to have a voice for softening the shoreline when you're there. But think of one of the early projects, the river, creating the wetlands of Milliken State Park. So we saw Atwater was all, hardscape and the parking lots, and we collected all the water, ran it through a innovative stormwater retention system, those wetlands, created places where the public could come down and see the turtles and the muskrat and hear the red-winged blackbird, and then that cleans the water, then it gets discharged to the Detroit River. So there's other examples as well, but we are, so the next time you walk the Riverwalk, look at some of those and think about this, okay?
Yeah,
and there's
so
similar.
it's really, I was just gonna say it really sounds like a win-win because it's softening the shoreline and improving accessibility. So thank you.
Absolutely, it's a win-win because it makes the first premise of soft engineering is to make it just as safe and stable. Then you enhance habitat, make it more aesthetically pleasing, and potentially save them money, because you can imagine poured concrete or steel sheet piling that has to be driven down to bedrock. The cost of that is enormous. So we can
Seawall
potentially
maintenance is
save.
expensive.
Yeah, there you go, Patrick. Absolutely. See, not only seawall installation and then maintenance over the long term is exceptional. So we can be smarter about it, and that's what we're trying to promote. And this is being done on the Canadian side, on Windsor and Essex County too. Some great examples over there.
Thank you.
I had another question. When you spoke about stormwater sewage runoff separation, that I believe that's federally mandated in the US to do. Do you know of progress? Are we making progress on that? Communities across the country?
Yes, we are making progress on that. Think of these old cities that have combined storm and sanitary sewers. You just can't go in and redo all the sewers, right? You can, as you put new ones in, as there's a new subdivision or a new development, you can separate sewers at that point, but you can't go back and, the cost of that would be astronomical. So what they do is they do in-system storage, pumps, and they move the storage around in the system of Detroit metropolitan area to retain all that waste. And then once the storm subsides, it actually goes into the treatment plant, gets treated, then to the Detroit River. They have these massive combined sewer overflow treatment facilities. There's one underground that is massive over there on Connor Creek. Dennis, you know where that is, on the banks of Connor Creek over there. So they take it and fill that big reservoir underground that nobody really sees. And then as the storm subsides, they take it and pump it to the wastewater treatment plant. So, and then they build green infrastructure, so we have less coming off. So the answer to your question, Mike, is yes, the Clean Water Act is driving this throughout the country, and all the big old cities have CSO control programs, and they stretch out over 20 and 30 years.
Well, and just an additional comment, I was in a Rotary Club in Indiana at the headwaters of the Maumee, and we often talked about how our communities were contributing to the algal bloom in Lake Erie, because that's where the Maumee starts. So we've had similar conversations there. So that just complicates the problem, right? Because it's international, it's interstate, it's huge.
Yeah, like the Maumee watershed, most of it's in Ohio, right? But some is in Indiana, some is in Michigan, right? And if, you've got certain farmers doing certain things and certain farmers not, and then you have big concentrated agricultural feeding operations, and then they're not regulated. Oh my goodness, that's where you end up where we're at. And, and for Ohio, that's Western Lake Erie is critical to their recreational tourism, you know?
Anybody else? John?
I got one more quick one.
Okay.
This is probably easy. You mentioned the Uniroyal site earlier. So I know they're putting, finally, I think everybody's very happy that the Riverwalk's now going to be going through that site to Belle Isle. Are they going to eventually be able to develop the whole site, or is that still too dirty?
Well, you can imagine, I'll just give you a little history on that site. That is one that's been on our radar for, you know, everyone's radar for 50 years, right, Bradley? So the first thing was to get some brownfield cleanup of most of the site. And that's litigation. That took over 2 decades, you know, and so a big portion of that site was cleaned up by, you know, Uniroyal and DTE. The land portion now, right? So they removed waste, they capped waste, and they did that. There's still some other issues that have to be dealt with there. Then we came in, we were so proud to build the Riverwalk, and this was 5 years ago, and we got the money through CAR 11 to do it, and we were ecstatic, right? We put the permits in to develop it, and in the 11th hour, they had to have an environmental review of it, and they discovered there was a contaminated sediment hotspot in front of the Uniroyal site. Oh my goodness, put us back on our heels. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency denied our permits, said you can't build the Riverwalk. Oh my goodness. So we had to go back to the drawing board and engage that Great Lakes that I mentioned. And some of you that drove by Belle Isle, you know, last fall could see the big barges out there and the cranes and moving materials. And it was like, to all of us, it didn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but it was huge to us, because once we dealt with that, they approved the permits. Now the rest is go. It'll be connect, you know, basically 3.5 miles, Bradley, on the river, right? I mean, you're going to see it from Belle Isle, and 3.5 miles is going to be phenomenal. So your question then was, what would the development look like? Eventually, what we have just done is improve the property value along East Jefferson, right? You know, the property owners along East Jefferson, just amazing gift. Think of Central Park and the people that overlook Central Park in New York. Well, they're going to look over the island jewel, Belle Isle, the Riverwalk, and in front of them will be this massive park, you know, and then the river along the thing. So because of, Bradley, some of the restrictions, there was some capped area in there. It'll be suitable for parkland, but they can't develop on it. But along East Jefferson, you know, you will see, I will predict some high rises in there and everything. Pretty special, but and that'll be an amazing parkland that'll be open to all. And the Riverwalk is also, we want to make sure that we are welcoming to all with benefits to all. That's the kind of thinking that's going on behind the scene. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. So environmentally, it's all a go. It's more probably politics and money and everything else.
Yeah, and in COVID and a downturn of economy, what
Right.
developers are going to get, you know, all of that.
Right.
But there is another section of that site that'll have to go through. Whoever develops along there will have to do some more brownfield cleanup. But the river is better, the shoreline's better, and you will see as soon as this year, 2021, you'll start seeing them build the Riverwalk. You know, make that physical connection to Belle Isle.
Good.
John Chambers.
John, has SEMCOG been involved in any of this? Because, and I'll say to you, back in the late 70s, I was involved in the super
Super sewer.
Super sorry. Yeah, God, don't even remind me. That was
Oh,
a
sorry about that.
political mess. And the reason I ask about the SEMCOG is, as you mentioned, we've got like Detroit and some other communities that have a combination, and trying to get away from that.
Right.
The cost was, and you kind of highlighted, somewhat prohibitive among other things.
Right.
And then trying to get city A to work with city B as it relates to, and I don't think a lot of people understand all of that communication that does or does not take place. Is it on their radar, I guess is the question.
Absolutely. SEMCOG is woven through this, solving these problems, whether it's, urban stormwater, non-point source pollution, infrastructure, habitat, takes a regional approach. So they've been involved from the beginning on this. Their green infrastructure plan is driving where we should plant trees in Detroit and everything else, and create new wetlands and enhance riparian habitat. They also have been instrumental in the whole, with the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, greenways. So think of non-motorized, the Riverwalk being a portion of it, Joe Louis Greenway, but there's a 1,000 miles of greenways in Southeast Michigan. So promoting different modes of transportation, which will make us will give us competitive advantage in the future. So SEMCOG is a major player in this. And you can imagine, like, I guess you highlighted community A not talking to community B. Well, I'll just give you one example, the Rouge River. There were 48 communities and everyone pointing the finger at everyone else and nobody wanting to deal with this. And there were 168 combined sewer overflow points. And so today they're the first watershed in the United States, the very first one to have a stormwater permit for all communities, and they're all working together through the Alliance for Rouge Communities. And who would have thought they were fighting like cats and dogs, right, John?
Yes, I was on that committee, among other things. I live in Novi, and we actually did a lot of retention systems, so the flow would be there and not to overflow. You talked about the hard surfaces, our ordinances and so forth address hard surfaces and what you have to have and what you can't have, which I think is important. How much volume of water can you have flowing into a creek bed or a little stream and so forth? And that was interesting because we actually originally started out, we just needed a retention basin. And someone like me said, no, you've got to do something for the whole community so it's operational and keeps that flow going the way it should be going, not overflowing. Because you showed the one picture of the little creek overflowed with a sort of the muddy water, and that's what you want to not have.
That's right.
Among other things.
Yeah. So green infrastructure, your tree planting. Maybe continuing that work between Southwest Ontario, South would be awesome.
Yeah. See, I come from Ohio, and the River Rouge was, I think, probably the Cuyahoga River was one of the first ones to catch on fire. So
I'd like to recognize one of our guest members, Carla. Please.
Oh, thank you. More than a question, it's one quick thought for John, for presenter John. Citizens Environmental Alliance, you had mentioned that. Are they still operating? Because when I drove by their offices in the time, I know the original founder, the dad, Coronado, passed away, but the son, Derek, was still taking over. But now I don't see his office open anymore. My brother's heavy into environment on our side, but he's not a Rotarian. And we're wondering, are they still operating and going?
Yeah. So thank up and mentioning Rick Coronado, who was big in the CAW and Unicor, but he really cared deeply about the environment. And started this non-governmental organization called Citizen Environment Alliance. And so the report checkup that I just gave, and I gave that URL so where you can find it, is dedicated in his memory, Carlo. So they are very, they are active. Of course, everyone is shut down during COVID right now, working out of their homes, and they're kind of not seen as much as they would like to be seen in Windsor and Essex County. But that's going to change once we hopefully get the vaccines and enough a higher percentage of people get them. So, but yeah, they're very much active. They were involved in this effort, and their advocacy is really important.
Okay, because I saw a lot more of a presence on the social media, especially Facebook, over the years, but not so much lately. And maybe COVID and maybe moving to working out of the home is another thing. But I also went on a boat trip that is done yearly along the river, and you know, there's some teaching about it and things like that. And I try to anyway promote that going, because a lot of people just don't know.
Yeah,
oh, this is getting better. Everything's getting better, and then they relax and don't do anything. Just like the COVID situation that we're all under. Oh yeah, numbers are going down. We're fine. Well, we're not fine. You know, people like just
so the
chill.
Carlo, the other thing in there is all these non-governmental organizations, you know, we're in an economic downturn for most, right? And think of non-governmental organizations.
They're the first.
Yep. So they are all of them hurting right now, you know, and I think that's a factor in there as well. By the way, that boat ride, thanks for bringing that up. That's an awesome thing. It's an annual boat ride. I'm every year, and it's a fantastic way to connect with the river, and they have different people to speak, and the food is amazing. You can have a beer on board, right, Carlo?
Yeah, it's way up. It's a Saturday afternoon, and it's a well-spent Saturday afternoon, I'll tell you.
Yeah. You guys should do one for the Detroit River. On the U.S. side.
Trey, I'm calling on Trey, but I worry that you're muted.
I'm not worried. I'd mute him if I had the chance.
John, and for the benefit of the people who didn't get here early, I introduced the head of the Michigan Science Center to my Rotary Club's meeting. He was the speaker Wednesday. And as I listened to him talk, all of a sudden I realized from what he was saying, how important it is that we make sure that our kids are learning science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, so that we don't get ourselves in as bad a situation as we're in now sometime in the future. And I began thinking about how we get kids from the Michigan Science Center, which is in the Cultural Center in Detroit on Warren, just east of John R., Warren and John R., and how we get them down to the island, down to Belle Isle, so that they can be more hands-on about the things you're describing. And that's a strategic interest. I mean, how do we do that? Can we build some kind of an express while we're rebuilding I-375? Can we build some kind of an express to get the kids from the Science Center down to the island to tie all this stuff together? Probably Windsor St. Clair will now build a bridge, an express tube from the other side of the river over to Belle Isle themselves. Because the Canadians are usually way ahead of us on doing things like this.
Hey, listen, we've done the Peche Isle. We put money in. Peche Isle is now under the ownership of, instead of the province, the city of Windsor takes care of all Peche Isle instead of having urban development that could have happened there. So we've done our part. Now,
Question would be, are you going to move your meetings back to the Windsor Yacht Club there?
Well, that's different than even politics. That's a money thing. But I see what you're saying. But you know what? No, I think some of that comes from school boards. If you want my honest opinion, Nancy, or my wife, my dear wife, as you know, it was retired now, science teacher at here at Riverside. She always took kids to Fighting Island. And every semester she'd do Fighting Island and she'd do Little River. compare the waters, compare the land, what it does, what chemicals are involved. I mean, it's going to be in a high school level, so it's not like university and major, knowing how to find which ones is phosphorus, but it's going to have that component too. And I think it comes from the school board. Try to get the schools in our area. We are on a watershed. How do we get them as kids to understand and know? Out of those, will the interest spark that at the university level, something could be done beyond that?
Yeah.
But the Science Center is a good start as well. I believe it,
Yeah. Trey, in response to your comment there, the State of Straight Conference, we've been doing it for 22 years. Each year we have to raise money to do it and everything else, but we always raise $2,000 for underserved schools to get them, usually when we invite high schools, Carla, we have them come from Windsor, Essex County too, and they come, but sometimes they can't afford the bus driver and the gas and the substitute teacher. So we try to eliminate those. So we determine need, they have to be a school system in need, but you tell us what you need and we give out scholarships. And then during the conference, we let the kids from Windsor, Essex County come together with the kids from Detroit and surrounding suburbs and have a forum to talk between them, And so we need to do more of that. So I'm just highlighting that we need to be creative about providing the opportunities, Trey, for like the Detroit Science Center, schools and everything else to benefit from these opportunities.
Yeah, that's great and a natural kind of thing to do. There's, and in fact, there's actually tradition along those lines. Back before the schools over here were in the courts about desegregation, and in fact, the state of Michigan was found to be guilty of segregation in 1970. Before that, the Detroit schools were very, very seriously prohibited by the state legislature from having buses. And they got buses for desegregation for the first time. But before that, the Detroit Rotary Club sponsored paying the money to hire buses and drivers to be able to get Detroit school kids to Detroit Cultural Center activities. All the suburban districts just used their own buses to get there before that. And some people in the Detroit Rotary Club noticed that imbalance and put up the money to arrange for some of the Detroit school kids to be able to get to Detroit cultural institutions. The tradition is already there. We'll just build on it.
One of the things we're thinking about on, greenways like Detroit Riverwalk, Joe Louis Greenway, other ones, is that school or a church or a business to adopt sort of like adopt a highway where you do it, you pick up the trash, you make sure to fly out and everything else. Could we get a school, a church, a business to adopt a section of the Joe Louis Greenway? And they would sign a 5 or 10 year partnership agreement to help maintain and steward that for all,
Oh, that's a spectacular idea.
Lots of good ideas. We have gone way over our time, but we, sounds like John, our speaker, had plenty of time for this, and I'm not interested in cutting people off if people want to stay. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, we certainly thank you, John. I have written down a number of your thoughts and ideas. I will pursue a few of them, and I'm hoping my colleagues here on the phone will help me pursue some of the others to make contacts and to move forward. And please do call on us anytime to write a Rotary letter or write individual citizen letters for these kinds of things when you know they're up. We will get it out.
Thank you.
I've got a quick question though. John, are you stationed at University of Windsor or are you on the other side of the creek?
I'm I'm stationed, my office is at University of Windsor, but I live on the US side, and so I'm not allowed to go there now, but I'm on Zoom calls all the time and
So
everything.
your emails are Windsor email?
Yeah, I've got
Windsor.ca.
both. I got my own personal one, and I got a uwindsor.ca one as well.
And it would be J Hartig?
JH Hartig
JH,
at,
okay.
at uwindsor. Is my work email. And yeah, we do lots of things with in
So there's
Essex
two H's
County.
in there?
Yeah,
J H and another H.
Another H.
Okay.
Okay. And Dennis has got all my contact information as well.
Okay.
Well, thank you all. I really appreciate it. It was fun doing this, and thanks for all you do.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
I'm gonna stop the recording and end the meeting.
All
Thanks,
right,
everybody.
very good.
Thank you,
We're all
Brett.
set.